Thank you. We now move to topical questions. Question number 1, Mike Mackenzie.
To ask the Scottish Government what benefits the recently announced development in the Pentland Firth of the largest tidal array in Europe will bring to the marine renewable energy industry.
Minister Fergus Ewing.
Presiding Officer, this is a significant milestone for the marine industry in Scotland and sends a positive message to the wider supply chain. Maygen is working closely with the Highland Council and Highlands and Islands Enterprise to maximise the local content of the project, having committed to invest in local businesses and skills. We are already seeing benefits as a result of Maygen's activities. The company has spent £1 million since 2010 in the Highlands. It has recruited staff locally and has taken part in successful supply chain networking event in Thurso, attended by 40 businesses.
Mike Mackenzie.
I thank the Minister for that answer, and I welcome the benefits of tidal projects like this one, but wonder if the Minister shares my concerns that the benefits of wave and tidal technologies may not be fully realised until the matter of disproportionate grid connection charges for island generators is addressed, and unless a suitable contracts for difference strike price for wave and tidal generators is set.
Minister.
Mike Mackenzie is absolutely correct that if all of the islands, the Western Isles, the Orkneys and the Shetland Islands, are to achieve their enormous potential, there must be the right support for them, and the evidence suggests that that means 3 island CFDs. And in addition, it is essential that we give the proper incentivisation to the wave and tidal sector, as Mike Mackenzie rightly argues. This is at the very top of my priorities, and whilst I welcome the DEC consultation published on the 18th of September, we do believe that the proposals need to be improved if we are to realise the enormous potential that the islands have to offer for renewable energy.
Jamie McGregor.
Thank you. How quickly does the Minister envisage the rollout of further projects within the Pentland Firth site? And does the Minister believe there's now potential for exporting this homegrown technology to other parts of the world?
Minister.
I understand in relation to the Maygen project that the first stage will be to assemble the offices that it requires onshore in Caithness, and then possibly next year, possibly the year after, depending upon things like the weather and the rate of progress, there will be the initial phase of up to 6 turbines placed in the water. Of the nature of these schemes, Presiding Officer, the important thing is to demonstrate their efficacy, to learn from the real-life experience of trying them in the extremely testing conditions of the Pentland Firth and Orkney waters. But we do anticipate that since Scotland is in the lead at the moment, and there are several other projects that, with due encouragement and support from the Scottish Government, the local authorities, the Crown Estate and the UK Government, there should be many other projects which will follow apace. And to respond to the question, I would confirm that we would anticipate that in due course these technologies developed in Scotland can be exported throughout the world.
Rob Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This is most welcome news for my constituency as the next step in offshore renewable development. What benefits can Maygen bring in the long term from this development once the arrays have proved a success, we hope? Could it lead to greater jobs, for example, in the form of a data centre, which could provide a lot of sustainable work for many more people in Caithness than the construction phase?
Minister.
Well, I acknowledge Rob Gibson's campaigning on this issue, and indeed he's probably been campaigning since before some of the members of this Parliament were actually born, Presiding Officer. Not Alex Johnson, I have to say. But he makes a very serious point. This is a huge project. It's the biggest tidal project in Europe. It has been consented in Scotland, and it has enormous potential to generate jobs and opportunities in Caithness, in Scrabster in particular, in which the Scottish Government has invested approximately £20 million in a new deep water quay, and the Port of Scrabster have now signed an MOU with Maygen to ensure that Scrabster is the location for the deployment and maintenance of the initial phase of this project. HIE estimates that the project will create up to 100 jobs for the assembly, deployment and maintenance of the 6 turbines, with the bulk of these being in the Highlands and Caithness. And I will be happy to meet with Mr Gibson to discuss the data centre idea with him as well.
Question 2, Jenny Mara.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to prevent attacks by dangerous dogs.
Cabinet Secretary Ken McCaskill.
I'm aware of weekend reports of a dog attack on an 8-year-old girl in Dundee. The local constituency MSP Shona Robertson has already raised this with me, and I appreciate the concerns raised. And I'm sure the sympathies of the Chamber go to the girl and her family as she recovers from her ordeal. There is obviously an ongoing police investigation. More generally, we are clear that owning a dog brings certain responsibilities, and irresponsible dog owners who allow their dogs to be out of control should be subject to appropriate controls and sanctions. That's why this Parliament in 2010 extended the criminal law so that a dog could be dangerously out of control either in a public or private place. This extension to private places meant an owner must be responsible for their dogs at all times and in all places. In addition, this Parliament also gave new powers to local authorities to require the microchipping of out-of-control dogs through the creation of the Dog Control Notice regime for use by local authority authorised officers. More recently, I attended the Justice Committee last week to seek their approval for increased penalties to be available to our courts when dealing with dangerously out-of-control dogs.
Jenny Mara.
The Cabinet Secretary talks about appropriate controls and sanctions, but these come after the attack. He talks about dog control notices. Is the Minister aware that Angus Council in my region has only issued 1 dog control notice since this Act came into force, and Dundee City Council, where this attack took place at the weekend, has issued none? Does the Minister plan to review the 2010 Act to see exactly how effective it is?
Cabinet Secretary.
No, what we do is seek to build upon the 2010 Act. Indeed, currently, south of the border is seeking to build upon the 2010 Act, and I pay tribute to Christine Graham, who was instrumental in building that in. There are obviously matters that we do realise that there have to be changes made because of court decisions down south, and that's being addressed, and as I referred to earlier, appeared at the Just Committee to support the legislative consent motion so that we can ensure that the actions and the character of the owner is taken into account, as well as dealing with matters relating to guide dogs and assistance dogs, where I think there clearly requires to be additional measures. So we do have a good basis in the 2010 Act. That is a matter recognised south of the border, who now seek to replicate it. But we have to be ever vigilant. With regard to the particular matters relating to Dundee and to Angus, it is for local authorities to decide to whom to issue a dog control notice. I think at the end of the day, though, from having been involved in this debate going through Parliament, we are conscious that it's deed, not breed, that the overwhelming majority of dog owners are responsible, and that it is a minority that are irresponsible that have to be targeted and dealt with.
Final question from Jenny Mara, then I'm going to come to Dennis Robertson.
But, Cabinet Secretary, there are frequent dangerous dog attacks that this legislation is not preventing, and most of them are on children. In Dundee this weekend, and a vicious attack in Arbroath this summer. Does the Cabinet Secretary feel it is now time to consider preventative measures like muzzling and leads, because sanctions that his government have put in force are just not working?
Cabinet Secretary.
I was not in Parliament in 2010, but that's the whole purpose of a dog control notice. The whole purpose of a dog control notice is so that the Council can decide whether to insist upon microchipping that goes with a dog control notice, can insist upon muzzling, or a whole variety of other matters. So I think this is a matter where we have to encourage local authorities. If Ms Mara is unhappy with the attitudes and actions of the local authorities, then I think she should raise that matter with them. But I do believe that we have a sound basis in law here that we're seeking to build upon, and indeed is being followed south of the border.
Dennis Robertson.
A child, and in fact on any person. Would you also share my concern with the increasing attacks on guide dog and assistance dogs? And can you confirm basically what the latest position is regarding the LCM on the Dangerous Dogs Act, and whether or not there will be an amendment from the Scottish Government to make it an aggregated offence?
Cabinet Secretary.
Obviously, the purpose of me appearing at the Justice Committee last week was to remove support for the LCM, to make sure that the changes being made south of the border that are replicating the 2010 legislation, but where there are matters we are not currently provided for in Scotland, in particular, as Dennis Robertson mentions with regard to assistance dogs, that we will have that cover. It is entirely unacceptable that these dogs should be subject to attack. We do have to make sure that the legislative basis provides for that, and I can give the member the assurance that we have sought to be included in that. Obviously, the timescale is now to some extent subject to matters south of the border, but I'll be happy to keep him advised of that as matters progress.
Annette Milne.
Presiding officer, it's been put to me by a number of representatives involved in the dog rescue sector that the indiscriminate breeding of dogs, particularly in socially rented properties, has resulted in many dangerous feral animals, and concern has been expressed to me that in time there will be a very serious or fatal accident. In the members' debate last week, I raised this issue of the indiscriminate breeding of dogs. So will the Cabinet Secretary agree to liaise with the Environment Minister and the Housing Minister to arrange a cross-party meeting between ministers and interested MSPs to discuss this issue?
Cabinet Secretary.
I was happy to take these matters on board, and we have been working closely across government, given that it was my colleague Paul Wheelhouse who was dealing with that matter in debate. I think what we can say is that it is a minority of dog owners who allow their dogs to behave in this manner, and is indeed built upon what was the maxim of 2010's legislation, which it is the deed, not the breed. And sadly, equally, it's sometimes not the animal, it's the owners that are the issue, and that's a matter that, to some extent, is not a matter of legislation regarding the animal, but action against the individual. But I'm more than happy to engage with Ms Milne on this matter.
Christine Graham.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for references to the Control of Dogs Act, which of course was initiated by Alec Neil and continued by me. And as the Minister is aware, there's been over 1,000 investigations in just over a year since it came into force. But I do think Jenny Mara has a point in that I think that it is not well enough publicised in order that owners, there's intervention at an early stage before dogs get to the stage of being dangerous. And can I ask if the Government has any plans or in any way it can help to publicise this legislation?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, what we do is seek to work with local authority partners. Many of these matters are dealt with and have to be dealt with at the front line by the local authority. I meet with COSLA on a regular basis, but I'll be more than happy to take on board the position of Ms Mara and indeed Ms Graham when I next meet with COSLA to perhaps point out that there is some dissatisfaction from this chamber, not necessarily, I would say, from myself as a government minister, but I'm happy to reiterate to Harry McGuigan and others who deal with community safety at COSLA level that there is, as I say, dissatisfaction. And equally, I'm more than happy to take on board any views that Ms Graham may have, along with Annette Milne, about how we further publicise this. It is, I think we should mention, a small minority. But these incidents, as Ms Mara mentioned, do happen. They are tragic, and we know how it can have fatal consequences. It's appropriate, therefore, that everybody at every level should do everything they can. I do believe that we have a sufficient legislative base. It is being built upon, and what we now need to do is to make sure that the theory in the legislation is in fact implemented and carried out in practice.
That ends topical questions. The next item